Once the house is in my name, she won't have a say. That's what I heard. My own son, smirking on the porch, whispering into his phone like I was already gone. But it wasn't just the house. He'd been calling my friends behind my back, telling them I was slipping, that I couldn't remember things, that I needed help. Suddenly, the garden club wouldn't meet my eyes. My own banker flinched when I asked about my account. I felt like I was vanishing in real time. But Daniel didn't know. I've been keeping records longer than he's been alive. And I never forget betrayal. Not once. I heard something strange about my son. I didn't believe it. Then I watched him. And what I saw changed everything. My name is Margaret Collins, and I'm 75 years old. Each morning I tend my roses and balance my checkbook in the sunlit kitchen of my paid-off Victorian home. My son Daniel, once my steady comfort after my husband Tom passed, now rushes through visits with half-explained phone calls and bulging folders tucked under his arm. The women at the garden club whisper and look away, while Sarah at the bank gives me that brittle smile reserved for the elderly they think are slipping. They don't know about my detailed notebooks. 30 years of community board minutes and household records, each conversation and oddity documented with a bookkeeper's precision. My roses mark the seasons like a clock, blooming just as they have since I planted them with Tom decades ago. But let me start from the beginning. I've lived in this house for 42 years. Every drawer is labeled, every bill filed by date, and my roses line the front walk like faithful guardians. Tom and I paid off the mortgage in '99. I remember the day we burned that final statement in the fireplace. Both of us. Grinning like teenagers. The house hasn't just been a building to me. It's been my anchor through Tom's passing and my retirement. Even now, I can close my eyes and trace every creak in the hardwood floors. You know how mothers remember the good times? Daniel used to drop by every Sunday without fail. He'd bring groceries, check the furnace, and spend hours tinkering with whatever needed fixing. Christmas meant him up on a ladder stringing lights, while Easter had him turning the flower beds and hauling mulch. "Mom," he'd say, "you've taken care of me my whole life. Let me return the favor." Those words used to warm my heart. But lately, well, things have changed. His visits got shorter, phone calls more rushed. When he does come by, there's always some urgent business call pulling him away. I tried not to read too much into it. After all, children have their own lives. But then, those business cards started showing up in my mailbox. First one, then another the very next morning. Both from lawyers I'd never heard of, both specializing in estate planning and elder care. I might be old, but I'm not slow. Why would strange attorneys be leaving their cards unless someone who knew my schedule, was putting them there? That's when the whispers started reaching me. Martha from next door mentioned hearing Daniel at the coffee shop talking about burdens and responsibilities. Helen from my garden club overheard him at the hardware store, sighing about aging parents and tough decisions. Each comment landed like a stone in my stomach. But I've been taking notes my whole life. It's what kept me sharp through 30 years of bookkeeping and community board meetings. So I pulled out a fresh notebook, started logging everything. Times of Daniel's calls, dates, of his visits, which folders he carried, who he spoke to while here. You'd be surprised how much you catch when you're really paying attention. I decided to test the waters. When Daniel called last Tuesday, I let it ring through to voicemail. His message was brief. "Mom, pick up. We need to discuss some paperwork." In the old days, he would have called back within the hour, concerned. This time, nothing. Not even a text to check if I was okay. Tonight, I'm sitting in my usual spot by the front window. The roses are just visible in the porch light, their shadows stretching across the lawn. My notebook lies open on my lap, pen ready. I've written down every detail so far. The time, 7:42 p.m., the weather, clear, even the fact that Daniel's 15 minutes later than he said he'd be. His headlights sweep across the driveway now, catching the dewdrops on my roses. I can see that familiar folder under his arm as he steps out of the car, thicker than usual, stuffed with papers he never quite explains. My hand stays steady as I note his arrival time and what he's carrying. Years of practice keeping minutes at meetings taught me how to observe without showing my cards. The porch light clicks on automatically. I had Tom install the motion sensor years ago. Daniel's silhouette grows larger as he approaches the front door. I set my pen down carefully, smoothing my expression into one of maternal welcome. Whatever's in that folder, whatever he's planning, I'll record every word, every gesture, every inconsistency. But he won't see me watching. Not yet. I watched Daniel through the window, taking in every detail as he approached. His shirt was wrinkled, unusual for him, and his tie hung loose, like he'd been running his hands through it all day. The folder he carried was one of those expensive leather ones from his office, bulging at the seams with papers. The doorbell chimed at exactly 7:43 p.m. I noted it down before answering, just like I'd done with every visit this month. "Mom?" He smiled that broad smile of his, the one that used to mean weekend pancakes and fishing trips. Now it reminded me of those real estate agents who show up uninvited, all teeth and promises. "You're late, dear," I said, checking my watch. I was starting to worry. Traffic was terrible. You know how it gets. He glanced at his phone, then back to me. "Mind if we sit? Got some things to go over." I led him to the kitchen table, the same one where I'd helped him with homework 30 years ago. The folder stayed half tucked behind his arm as he sat, like he was shielding it. His phone buzzed 3 times while we talked, but he just silently typed under the table, thinking I couldn't see. "How's work?" I asked, pouring us both tea, chamomile, his favorite since childhood. "Busy, really busy." He shifted the folder further away. "Actually, I've been meaning to tell you. I've got this new advisor helping me with some financial planning. Really sharp guy." "Oh?" I picked up my pen, pretending to work on my crossword puzzle. "Anyone I know?" "No, he's new in town." Daniel's fingers drummed against the folder. "Listen, Mom. I should run. Early meeting tomorrow." I noted his departure time, 8:17 p.m. Shortest visit in weeks. The next afternoon found me tending my roses, something I've done every spring since Tom and I first bought the house. The watering hose hung heavy in my hand as I worked my way along the porch. That's when I heard it. Daniel's voice, sharp and clear through the screen door he thought was safely closed. "Yeah, everything's set," he was saying. "Once the house is in my name, she won't have a say." My fingers went numb around the hose. Water pooled at the bottom step as I stood frozen, letting it run. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears, but my mind stayed crystal clear. Years of bookkeeping had taught me to record first, react later. I forced myself to memorize his exact words, the time, 2:34 p.m., even the way his voice echoed off the porch ceiling. Inside, my hands shook as I wrote everything down in my notebook. The ink smeared a little, the first messy entry I'd made in years. Part of me wanted to burst through that screen door right then, demand answers, ask my son how he could even think of stealing my home. But experience had taught me better. One piece of evidence might be dismissed as a misunderstanding. I needed more. I didn't have to wait long. Around 6:45 p.m., Daniel's car pulled up again. "Forgot my jacket," he called through the screen. I watched from the kitchen as he retrieved it from the back of a chair, that folder clutched tightly against his chest. Even in his rush, he couldn't help checking his phone, always the messages, always the secret conversations. My hand rested on the doorknob. A lifetime of keeping quiet, of maintaining peace, whispered at me to let him go. But Tom's voice echoed in my memory. "Maggie, you've got steel in your spine. When it matters." And by God, this mattered. I opened the front door, my face as composed as if I were chairing another women's club meeting. Daniel turned, one foot already on the porch step. "Which name did you say you wanted on my deed, Daniel?" The way Daniel's face shifted at my question, I'll never forget it. That warm smile of his turned into something else, something that reminded me of a car salesman who once tried selling me rust. Protection I didn't need. "Mom," he said, drawing the word out like I was a child who'd said something silly. "What are you talking about?" "I heard you on the porch earlier, on your phone." My voice came out steadier than I felt. "Talking about putting my house in your name." He laughed, not his real laugh, the one I remembered from Christmas mornings and birthday surprises. This one had sharp edges. "Oh, Mom, you must have misheard. I was talking about work stuff." "I wrote down exactly what you said." I pulled out my notebook, the one I'd been keeping since things started feeling off. "At 2:34 this afternoon. You're keeping notes on me now?" His eyebrows shot up. "Mom, this is concerning. Very concerning." He stepped closer, lowering his voice like we were sharing a secret. "Have you been feeling confused lately? Forgetting things?" Something in my chest tightened. "I know." "What I heard, Daniel. Do you?" He tilted his head, studying me like I was one of his business problems. "Because last week you couldn't find your reading glasses and they were right on top of your head. Remember that?" I opened my mouth to argue, but found myself thinking back. Had that happened? My hand trembled slightly as I gripped my notebook tighter. "And the week before," he continued, "you swore someone had moved your garden tools, but they were exactly where you'd left them." That's different," I said, but my voice wavered. The certainty I'd felt moments ago started to crack around the edges. Daniel's face softened into what looked like concern. He reached out and patted my hand, the same way I used to pat his when he was scared of thunderstorms. "Listen, why don't we simplify things? Make it easier for you." "Simplify what?" The words came out smaller than I intended. "Everything." He smiled again, gathered up his folder, and headed for the door. "Don't worry about any of this. We'll sort it all out." He chuckled as he left, like we'd just shared a harmless misunderstanding. I spent the next hour writing down every word of our conversation, every gesture. Then I called Martha, my friend from the garden club. We'd known each other for 20 years. Surely she'd see what was happening. "Oh, Maggie," she said, her voice careful. "Daniel mentioned you've been misplacing things, having trouble keeping track. It happens to all of us at this age." My second call, to Betty from the women's club, went even worse. "Just yesterday," she said, "you forgot we'd rescheduled the monthly meeting. Daniel's right to be concerned." After I hung up, the house felt too big, too quiet. The hum of the refrigerator seemed to mock me, like it knew something I didn't. I sat at my kitchen table, the same one where I'd balanced the household books for decades, and tried to think straight. Had I been forgetting things? Was I seeing plots where none existed? I got up and walked to my file cabinet, the one Tom had bought me when we first married. Each drawer opened with a familiar squeak. Inside, everything was exactly where it should be. Utility bills sorted by month, bank statements neatly paper-clipped, property tax receipts in their own folder. My checkbook entries were precise down to the penny. Last week's groceries, yesterday's phone bill, this morning's newspaper payment, all recorded in my steady handwriting. Through the window, I watched Daniel's car lights disappear down the street. The roses cast long shadows across the lawn in the fading light. I needed to be sure, completely sure, before I told anyone else what I suspected. No more phone. Calls, no more asking friends. I needed proof that only I could find. The refrigerator hummed behind me, but now it sounded less accusing and more like the steady tick of a clock. Time to start searching. I couldn't sleep that night. Something about Daniel's jacket kept nagging at me, the way he'd clutched it close, making sure that folder stayed hidden. You know how sometimes the smallest details are the ones that matter most? By 5 a.m., I was sitting at my kitchen table, watching the sky turn from black to gray. Daniel had been jogging the same route every morning for years, right past my house, usually around 6:30. Some habits, thank heaven, don't change. The spare key to his car had been hanging on my key rack since last winter, when he'd asked me to warm it up on cold mornings. He'd forgotten to take it back, and I'd forgotten to remind him. Funny how things work out. Sometimes. I finished my tea and checked my old Timex, 6:25. Right on schedule, I heard his car pull up. From behind my curtain, I watched him step out in his running clothes, stretch his hamstrings the way his high school track coach had taught him, then start off down the sidewalk. My hands were steady as I walked to his car. Years of bookkeeping teach you to stay calm when checking the numbers, even when you suspect they won't add up. The morning was quiet except for a few early birds, the kind that had always woken Tom for work. The key slid in smoothly. I opened the driver's door and reached for the glove compartment. It popped open with a soft click that sounded too loud in the morning stillness. Inside, under some old insurance papers and gas receipts, I found what I was looking for, a thick manila envelope. My throat went tight when I saw the law firm's name in the corner. Bradbury & Sons, one of those fancy downtown offices where they charge you just for breathing their air. I'd seen their business card in my mailbox last week. The documents inside were crisp, official-looking. My eyes caught phrases that made my stomach turn: transfer of deed, immediate effect, relinquishment of rights. There it was in black and white, papers to sign over my home to Daniel without any compensation. The camera was already in my pocket, the little point and shoot I've used for garden club photos for years. Every real estate document, every signature line, every date, I photographed them all, making sure the morning's newspaper edge showed in each shot for dating. My fingers didn't shake once. You learn things, running a household for 50 years. You learn to double-check the details, to keep records, to trust your gut when the numbers don't match, and you learn to put everything back exactly the way you found it. I closed the glove compartment with the same soft click, locked the car, and walked back inside. The morning birds were still singing, but they sounded different now. Less like nature's alarm clock, more like a warning. In my study, I printed the photos, slipped them into a fresh envelope, and wrote today's date and time in my neat accountant's hand. The safe behind Tom's old military. Photo clicked open. He'd taught me the combination on our first anniversary, saying a wife should always have access to important papers. I tucked the envelope behind our marriage certificate and closed it tight. The safe key went into my pocket just as I heard Daniel's footsteps coming up the walk, that same rhythm he'd had since track team days. I moved to the kitchen, took out 2 teacups, the blue willow ones we'd always used for serious talks, and set them on the table. Through the window, I watched him wipe sweat from his forehead with the bottom of his running shirt. He'd done that same gesture since he was a teenager, coming home from practice. My son, my only child, the one person I thought I'd never have to guard against. I filled the kettle and turned on the burner. Time to have a conversation, a calm, clear-headed talk to see if he'd tell me the truth about those papers. My hand touched the safe key in my pocket, cool metal against my fingers, as Daniel opened the screen door. The next morning, I met Helen and Joyce at Mel's Diner, just like we'd done every Thursday for the past decade. The vinyl booth squeaked as I slid in. Same seat, same time, same friends, or so I'd thought. "You seem tired, Maggie," Helen said, stirring her coffee without meeting my eyes. "Everything okay at home?" I took a slow breath. "Actually, I need to talk to you both about Daniel. He's been—" "Oh, Daniel!" Joyce cut in, her voice too bright. "Such a caring boy, watching out for you. He mentioned you've been having trouble with the mail lately?" My coffee cup clinked against the saucer. "Trouble with the mail?" "You know, missing bills, losing track of letters." Helen's voice had that careful tone people use with children. "It happens to everyone eventually." I set my cup down and pulled out my datebook. "Actually, I have every piece of mail logged right here. Date received, date paid." "Oh, honey," Joyce patted my hand. "Don't worry about all that. Daniel says he's got everything under control." The breakfast special congealed on my plate as they exchanged glances. I'd seen that look before, at funeral receptions when people discussed the widow in whispers. "Has Daniel been talking to you about me?" I kept my voice steady, like I was discussing the weather. Helen shifted in her seat. "He's just concerned, that's all. Says you've been forgetting things." "Like what things?" My pen was ready, poised over my notebook. "Well?" Joyce trailed off, suddenly fascinated by her toast. "Little things, important things. He mentioned something about utility bills?" I pulled out last month's water bill from my purse, paid, stamped, and filed with its receipt. "You mean this one?" They both stared at their plates. When the check came, I counted out exact change, $12.47 for a breakfast I'd barely touched. The waitress started to take my plate, but I stopped her. "Could I get a receipt, please? I like to keep track. You know how a room feels when the air conditioning kicks off?" That's how it felt walking out of Mel's that morning. My so-called friend's silence followed me to the car. Back home, I tried. One more person, Martha next door, who'd borrowed my budget worksheets last spring for her daughter's first apartment. The phone rang twice before she picked up. "Martha, it's Margaret Collins." "Oh, Margaret." Another careful voice. "I was just heading out. Remember those budget sheets I gave Sarah? I was wondering if you'd mind telling me how they worked out." A pause. "Listen, Margaret, I'm sorry, but I really can't talk right now." Maybe you should call Daniel?" The click of her hanging up echoed in my quiet house. I sat at my kitchen table, where afternoon light fell across decades of careful living. My fingers traced the edge of my checkbook. Every entry precise, every balance perfect. Somewhere in town, my son was spinning stories about his poor, confused mother, and people were believing him. You don't survive 75 years without learning how to fight. Back. I pulled out my heavy 3-ring binder, the one I'd used for women's club minutes, and labeled it Finances in clear block letters. Section by section, I built my case. Bank statements, neatly highlighted. Utility bills, each one paid on time. Grocery receipts, organized by date. I added a list of every household task I'd completed recently. Changing furnace filters, scheduling chimney cleaning, replacing porch light bulbs. The last page in the binder stayed blank. I'd typed a heading, Letter of Attestation. Underneath, I'd written one line. To whom it may concern, I have known Margaret Collins for years. Now I just needed someone brave enough to sign it. The phone rang, making me jump. I glanced at the caller ID and felt my stomach tighten. First National Bank, Martha Whitmore. The bank's glass doors whooshed open, cool air hitting my face. I dressed. Carefully. Pressed slacks, my good blazer, hair neat. The finances binder weighed heavy in my arms like a shield. Martha Whitmore's office hadn't changed since I'd opened my first account here 30 years ago. Same fake plant in the corner, same motivational posters about success and teamwork. But Martha's smile was different today, stretched thin, like a rubber band about to snap. "Margaret, please sit." She gestured to the chair across her desk. "What can I help you with?" "Actually, Martha, I think you might be able to clear something up." I set my binder on her desk. "I understand Daniel's been asking about my accounts?" Her fingers tapped the desk edge. "Well, yes, he mentioned wanting to simplify things, streamline your banking. It's quite common for children to help manage their parents' finances as they what, Martha?" I kept my voice gentle. "Age?" She shifted in her chair. "These transitions can be delicate." I opened my binder to the first tab. I brought my records, every payment for the last year, all on time, and here, I flipped to another section, are the minutes from last week's women's club meeting. I'm still chair, you know. We're organizing the summer festival fundraiser. Martha's eyes flickered over the neat columns, the precise handwriting. For a moment, I saw doubt crack her careful expression. "This is very thorough," she said slowly, but Daniel seemed quite concerned about my competence? The word hung between us like smoke. Perhaps we should circle back to this discussion later. She stood, smoothing her skirt, with Daniel present. And there it was, the institutional hesitation, the subtle push toward my son's authority. I'd seen it before at church functions when widows' children started managing the high checkbooks. Thank you for your time, Martha. I gathered my binder, keeping my movements steady. No shaking hands today. I appreciate your candor. Main Street was busy with afternoon shoppers. I walked slowly, my sensible shoes clicking on the sidewalk. Outside the drugstore, Mrs. Peterson and Betty Williams huddled over their shopping bags. Such a shame about Margaret Collins, Betty's voice drifted over. But you know, at that age. I heard they're talking about guardianship, Mrs. Peterson whispered back. Daniel's just trying to protect. I turned the corner before they could see me, their words following like wasps. My kitchen felt too quiet when I got home. The afternoon sun caught dust motes dancing above the table where I'd balanced checkbooks for decades. I pulled out an index card, white, lined, crisp as new snow, and uncapped my pen. Next steps, I wrote at the top. The list felt like a battle plan. In a way, I suppose it was. I moved through the house methodically, checking locks on windows and doors. The living room curtains whispered closed, one by one. Back in the kitchen, I slid the finances binder into my wall safe, hearing the satisfying click of the lock. That's when I heard it, the hollow thump of something landing in the mailbox. My heart stuttered as I opened the front door. Another business card lay on the welcome mat. Another lawyer's name in raised print, sharp as teeth. I picked it up with steady fingers, added it to my growing collection, and wrote the date and time on the back. That night, sleep danced just out of reach. You know those hours when the house talks to you? Every creak becomes a whisper of doubt. Every shadow a reminder of what you might be missing. I lay there watching moonlight inch across my bedroom ceiling. Daniel's smirk playing on repeat in my mind. Had I actually heard him write on the porch that day? Was my handwriting in the checkbook as steady as I thought? The questions crept in like cold drafts under a door, chilling my certainty bit by bit. Around 3 a.m, I gave up on sleep. Wrapped in my old flannel robe, the one Tom gave me our last Christmas together, I padded down to the kitchen. The linoleum felt cool under my slippers as I pulled out my checkbook and account ledgers. Show me, I whispered to the pages. Show me I'm not losing it. Line by line, I traced my records. Electric bill, paid on the 3rd. Grocery receipts, filed by date. Property tax installment, scheduled for next Tuesday. Each entry marched across the page in my familiar hand, straight and true as fence posts. The sun was just touching the horizon when the doorbell rang. Harold stood on my porch, still tall. Despite his 70 years, wearing that worn brown jacket he'd had since his judge days. My brother-in-law's face carried its usual calm, but his eyes held something sharper. Thought I'd stop by for coffee, he said simply. Been a while. I knew that look. It was the same one he'd worn when Tom got sick, ready to help, but waiting to be asked. We settled at the kitchen table, morning light warming the curtains my mother had sewn decades ago. The coffee pot gurgled in the background while I laid it all out. The lawyer's cards appearing like weeds, Daniel's whispered phone call, the draft deed I'd photographed, Martha's careful distance at the bank. Harold didn't interrupt once. He just listened, occasionally nodding, his coffee growing cold beside him. When I finished, I pulled out my binder of notes and photos. I know how it sounds, I said, my voice smaller than I'd meant it to be. Everyone seems to think I'm imagining things. Harold picked up the photograph of the deed, studying it with eyes that had seen 40 years of legal documents. Then he set it down and looked at me straight on. Maggie, he said, using my old nickname. I don't see a woman losing her mind. I see a woman under siege. Just like that, the weight I'd been carrying lightened. You know that moment when someone finally sees what you've been trying to show them? It feels like taking a full breath after being underwater too long. "Tell me what to do, Harold," I said, pushing the binder toward him. "I've been documenting everything, but—" He nodded, already flipping through my notes. "Smart girl. First rule in any legal situation: maintain records. You're ahead of the game there." His finger traced down a page. "Second rule: avoid direct confrontation for now. Let them think you're in the raw. Dark. It's your advantage." My shoulders dropped about 2 inches. Having Harold there, speaking in his measured judge's voice, made the whole situation feel manageable, like a puzzle with actual solutions, not just a nightmare I couldn't wake from. "I'll review these properly," he said, patting the binder. "And Maggie, if anything formal comes, any legal papers, court notices, you call me immediately. I'll be present for every step." The morning. Sun had warmed the kitchen properly now, catching the rim of his coffee cup and the silver in his hair. For the first time in days, I felt steady again. That's when the doorbell chimed. I walked to the front door, Harold's presence at my back like a shield. There on the welcome mat lay a certified letter, crisp and official. The return address made my stomach clench. Daniel Collins, attorney at law. Harold stood beside me as I picked up the certified letter. My fingers weren't quite steady as I signed the receipt slip, but I made sure my signature stayed within the lines. Every detail mattered now. Back at the kitchen table, I sliced the envelope open with the letter opener Tom had given me on our 20th anniversary. The paper inside felt expensive, crisp, the kind Daniel's new law firm used. I unfolded it carefully, aware of Harold leaning in. "Petition for guardianship." I read aloud, then stopped. The words blurred a little. Harold gently took the letter. "Let me, Maggie." He read it in his courtroom voice, making the legal language clear. Daniel was petitioning the court to declare me incompetent. A hearing was scheduled in 30 days. My son wanted control of my property, my finances, my life. The floor seemed to tilt under my chair. You know that feeling when you miss a step in the dark? It was like that, but worse because the light was bright and cruel. 30 days, Harold said, tapping the hearing date. "That's our timeline." He pulled out his pocket calendar. "We need a schedule, weekly check-ins minimum, and you'll document everything you do, every day." I grabbed my notepad, the one I've kept by the phone since 1982. "Tell me." "First, we duplicate every important file you have. Bank statements, property papers, medical records, everything." He paused. "And Maggie, we need to prove your competence isn't just occasional. It's consistent, daily." I nodded, already writing. The shock was wearing off, replaced by something harder. "I'll start a new binder." "Good. Label it competence." Harold's judge voice was fully engaged now. "Include your medication list, showing you manage it yourself. Those women's club agendas you chair, your garden plans with exact planting dates." I thought of my utility bills, always paid early. I have records of every company I've contacted this year. Dates, times, who I spoke with. Perfect. Add those. Harold pulled out his own notebook. "I'll draft an affidavit about your condition today. Date and time specific, noting your clarity and organization." My kitchen calendar hung on the wall, the one with roses for each month. I walked over and found the hearing date, circling it in red. 30 boxes to fill with proof. "We document everything," Harold said. "Every coherent conversation, every bill paid, every meal cooked. Build a record they can't dismiss." I touched the calendar's glossy surface. 30 days. 29 after tonight, Harold corrected. "And Maggie, you're not alone in this." After Harold left, I sat at my desk with the new binder labeled Competence in my best handwriting. Inside, I created sections: daily activities, financial management, social engagement, property maintenance. The medications went first, all 4 prescriptions lined up with dosages and schedules. Next came the women's club papers, 6 months of agendas I'd written and meetings I'd chaired. Minutes showing my motions, my votes, my leadership. I added last week's garden diagram with dates and varieties of each rose planned for spring planting. The utility section filled with recent calls. Adjusting the gas payment, reporting a flickering streetlight, scheduling winter furnace maintenance. Each entry showed times, names, and outcomes. When the grandfather clock struck 9, I had 2 thick binders on my desk. The original, finances, and now, competence, both ready for Harold's review. My son might have his law degree, but I had 40 years of bookkeeping precision and a retired judge in my corner. Before bed, I stood at the calendar again. The red circle looked like a target, or maybe a finish line. I found my pen and crossed out the 30 at the top of the circle. 29 days, I whispered, writing the new number. Tomorrow would be 28. I switched off the kitchen light, but paused in the doorway. The moonlight caught the binders on my desk, their labels clear even in the dim. My hands had stopped shaking hours ago. Harold arrived each morning at 9. Sharp, carrying his old leather briefcase. We'd spread papers across my dining room table like we were planning a military campaign. Maybe we were, in a way. Have you ever noticed how preparation for battle and preparation for court look awfully similar? Let's sort these by type, Harold said on our first morning, pulling out manila folders. Receipts in one, bank statements in another, everything dated and initialed. I'd been keeping receipts since Frank and I bought the house in '72. Some habits die hard, I used to tell him when he'd tease me about my filing system. Now those old habits felt like armor. The afternoons were for practice. Harold would sit in his chair, put on his reading glasses, and become the opposing counsel. Mrs. Collins, can you tell us your monthly expenses? Mortgage is paid off, I'd answer clearly. Monthly utilities average $143.22. Property taxes are $2,191 annually, which I divide into quarterly payments. Good, Harold would nod. Direct and specific. Now about your medications. 4 prescriptions, I'd recite. Blood pressure at 7 a.m., calcium at breakfast, arthritis pill at lunch, and sleeping aid as needed. All managed without assistance for 5 years since Frank passed. You learn things about yourself preparing for court, like how steady your voice can stay when your heart isn't. How crisp numbers feel in your mouth when you've practiced them enough. One Tuesday afternoon, I drove to Susan Chen's locksmith shop on Oak Street. She'd been doing business with our family since Frank needed extra keys cut for the garage in '85. Safety deposit service? She asked when I explained what I needed. Just until the hearing, I said, sliding over an envelope marked, to Harold if requested. Inside were copies of Daniel's draft. Deed, proof of what my son had planned. Susan's eyes softened. No charge, Margaret. Some things matter more than money. After she'd locked away the envelope, I called Harold from my car. 1 copy secured, I reported, like you suggested. Good, he said. I just spoke with your banker. She's noting your account file. No major changes without direct verification. That evening, I sat at my desk and began writing my personal statement. The words came slowly at first, then picked up speed. I purchased this house with my late husband Frank in 1972. We raised our son here, paid every mortgage payment on time, and celebrated the final payment in 1997. I've maintained the property through careful budgeting and regular maintenance. The next paragraph covered my daily routine. Morning medications, bill-paying schedule, garden maintenance, and women's club responsibilities. Simple facts, clearly stated. No emotion, just evidence. Harold reviewed it the next morning. Perfect, he said. Clear, factual, and shows long-term competence. The days ticked by in a blur of preparation. Every morning, I'd cross off another number on the calendar, watching 29 become 28, then 20, then 10. The evening before the hearing, I stood in front of my closet. Nothing flashy, just my navy dress, sensible shoes, and pearl Earrings Frank gave me on our 25th anniversary. The outfit said exactly what I needed it to: dignity, stability, competence. I checked both binders one final time. Finances and competence in clear lettering, every page in order, sticky tabs marking key sections. They fit perfectly in my canvas bag, which I placed by the front door. The grandfather clock in the hall struck 6, its deep tone carrying through the quiet house. Through my kitchen window, I could hear the courthouse clock tower echoing across town, the same bells that had marked time in this community since before I was born. I touched the calendar one last time, my finger tracing the red circle I'd drawn so many days ago. "One night more," I whispered. The roses outside my window were nothing but thorny stems now, waiting for spring. But they'd bloom again. They always did. That courthouse smell hit me the moment we pushed. Through the heavy doors, old paper and floor polish, with just a hint of anxiety sweat. You know the kind of smell I mean? The one that makes your stomach clench even when you know you're in the right. Harold's steady footsteps beside me helped calm my nerves as we made our way through security. I placed my canvas bag on the X-ray belt, watching the binders slide through like dark rectangles on the screen. The guard nodded, probably used to seeing plenty of desperate paperwork come through those doors. "Hearing room 3, Harold murmured, guiding me down the marble hallway. His shoes clicked against the floor, the same floor where he'd presided as judge for 23 years before retiring. Strange how life brings you full circle sometimes. The room itself was smaller than I'd imagined, more office than courtroom. Dark wood panels lined the walls, and the morning light filtered through. Tall windows, casting long shadows across the carpet. Daniel was already there, settled in his chair like he owned the place. He had a neat stack of papers in front of him, and beside him sat a woman in an expensive suit who I assumed was his advisor, the one he'd mentioned in that phone call on my porch. My son wouldn't look at me. Funny how that still hurt, even now. I took my seat across the aisle, setting my canvas bag carefully on the table. The binders made a soft thud as I arranged them, and I noticed Daniel's advisor glance over, her eyebrows lifting slightly at their thickness. Good. Let them wonder what was inside. The bailiff's voice cut through the quiet. All rise. The judge who entered wasn't what I expected either. Judge Martinez looked younger than me, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She settled into her chair and adjusted her robe before speaking. "This is a competency hearing regarding Margaret Collins," she began, her voice carrying that particular mix of authority and patience I remembered from my women's club meetings. "The petitioner alleges cognitive decline and financial mismanagement requiring intervention. We'll hear from both parties today before making any determinations." Daniel's attorney stood first, tall, polished, probably charging more per hour than I spent on groceries in a month. He gestured toward a spreadsheet being handed to the judge. "Your Honor, these financial records show concerning patterns," he said. "Late payments, confusion over basic transactions." My fingers tightened on the edge of the table. That spreadsheet looked familiar. It was my checkbook register, but only certain transactions highlighted. They'd cherry-picked every time I'd post-dated a check or shifted money between accounts, making it look like confusion instead of careful cash flow management. The judge glanced at me over her glasses. "Mrs. Collins, do you have counsel present?" Harold stood, straightening his tie. "Your Honor, I'm Harold Bennett, retired circuit court judge. While I'm not acting as formal counsel, I'd like permission to assist Mrs. Collins today in an informal capacity." Judge Martinez nodded. "Given the circumstances, I'll allow it." She turned to me. "Mrs. Collins, I'd like to hear from you directly about your day-to-day activities and decision-making capacity." I felt every eye in the room on me. Daniel had leaned back in his chair, almost smiling, so sure he'd already won. The same smile he'd worn when he was 7 and thought he'd successfully hidden a broken vase behind the couch. I took a deep breath, placed both hands flat on the table, and pulled the competence binder forward. The tab markers. I'd so carefully arranged, peeked out like tiny flags of defiance. "Proceed, Mrs. Collins," Judge Martinez said. I opened the binder to my first marked page, feeling the familiar weight of documentation under my fingers. All those years of careful record-keeping had led to this moment. Daniel might have been smirking, but I had something better than confidence. I had proof. "Thank you, Your Honor." I opened to my first tabbed section. I maintain a daily schedule that includes medication management, household duties, and community commitments. My voice came out steadier than I'd expected. Years of running women's club meetings had taught me something about commanding a room. I walked through my typical day, pointing to dated entries. I take 3 medications each morning at 7, all documented here with my doctor's current prescriptions. I track blood pressure readings in this log, taken twice daily. I slid the medical pages toward the judge. The advisor next to Daniel whispered something in his ear. He nodded, but I noticed his fingers drumming against his leg, an old tell from when he was nervous as a boy. "I've chaired our local women's club for 15 years, I continued, turning to the next section. "These are minutes from our last 3 meetings, which I recorded and distributed. You'll note the dates, attendance, and treasury reports, all verified by our board secretary." Judge Martinez studied the pages, her eyes moving methodically across each line. "Very organized, Mrs. Collins. Please continue." I pulled out my garden maintenance schedule. I maintain detailed records of plantings, fertilizer applications, and seasonal care. The roses along my front walk have bloomed on schedule for 23 years because of this system. I allowed myself a small smile. The Master Gardeners Association asked me to present my documentation method at their spring workshop. Harold stood then, lifting the finances binder. "Your Honor, with your permission, I'd like to address the financial concerns raised by the petitioner." At the judge's nod, Harold opened to our first tab. "Mrs. Collins maintains meticulous records of all transactions. These are her checking account statements for the past year, showing consistent balancing and no overdrafts." He turned several pages. "Here are utility payments, all made within 5 days of receipt. Property taxes, paid in full. Home insurance, current." The judge compared these to Daniel's selective spreadsheet, her expression thoughtful. "Do you have any unusual or concerning documents to present, Mr. Bennett?" Harold paused, straightening his tie. "Your Honor, I request permission for a brief proffer of evidence that directly relates to the motivation behind this hearing." "Granted." Harold removed the envelope of photographs. These images were taken by Mrs. Collins on March 15th of this year. They show a draft deed discovered in the petitioner's vehicle, prepared to transfer Mrs. Collins's home without her knowledge or consent. The air seemed to vanish from the room. Daniel's face went chalk white. Harold continued. "The dates correspond to phone calls Mrs. Collins documented, including one overheard conversation where the petitioner stated, and I quote, 'Once the house is in my name, she won't have a say.'" Daniel's attorney shot to his feet. "Your Honor, we request a brief recess to—" "Denied." Judge Martinez cut in sharply. She turned to my son. "Mr. Collins, does this draft deed exist?" Daniel's mouth opened and closed. That is, we were exploring options for—" "A simple yes or no, Mr. Collins." He tugged at his collar. "It was just a preliminary—" "Your Honor," Harold interjected, "we can provide the original documents for verification. They remain in the petitioner's vehicle where Mrs. Collins photographed them." The gallery behind us buzzed with whispers. I kept my eyes forward, hands folded in my lap, just like I'd practiced. 23 years of rose gardening had taught me that patience often revealed the truth, whether in blooms or in courtrooms. Judge Martinez accepted the photos, studying each one carefully before looking up at Daniel. His hands had started to shake, reminding me of when he'd broken that vase all those years ago. The difference was, this time he couldn't hide the pieces. Mr. Collins, the judge said, her voice carrying the weight of authority, I advise absolute candor in your next response. Daniel's shoulders slumped as Judge A. Martinez shuffled her papers, preparing to deliver her findings. The morning light streamed through the high windows, catching dust motes that danced above our heads. I'd seen that same light in my kitchen countless times while balancing checkbooks and organizing files. Funny how clarity shows up in the simplest moments. Having reviewed the evidence presented, Judge Martinez began, her voice steady and clear, this court finds no basis for declaring Mrs. Collins incompetent. To the contrary, the methodical documentation of her daily affairs, financial records, and community involvement demonstrates a level of organization that many would do well to emulate. I felt Harold's gentle pat on my arm, but kept my eyes forward, drinking in each word. The petition is hereby dismissed with prejudice. The judge's gaze swept the courtroom before settling on Daniel. Furthermore, this court is deeply troubled by evidence suggesting an attempt to manipulate an elder's property rights through false claims of incompetence. The gallery's whispers grew louder, and I caught glimpses of familiar faces. The banker who'd been so hesitant, neighbors who'd pulled away, friends who'd doubted my mind. They were all hearing the truth now, laid bare under fluorescent lights and legal procedure. In light of the documented attempt to transfer property without consent, Judge Martinez continued, I am directing the clerk to forward these proceedings to the district attorney's office for review. Additionally, the court takes judicial notice that First State Bank has already implemented protective measures regarding Mrs. Collins' accounts. Daniel's advisor gathered papers quickly, already edging toward the exit. My son sat frozen, his carefully constructed plan crumbling like dried leaves. Mr. Collins, the judge addressed him directly, this court views attempts to exploit elderly parents through false claims of incompetence as particularly egregious. Your mother's home and independence are not yours to steal through legal manipulation. You may want to seek counsel regarding potential criminal implications. The whispers became a wave washing through the gallery. I recognized Mrs. Peterson from the garden club, her hand pressed to her mouth. Tom Baker from the hardware store shook his head slowly. Sarah Mitchell, who'd known Daniel since kindergarten, wouldn't even look his way. This hearing is adjourned, the gavel crack echoed like thunder. Harold helped me gather our binders as Daniel rushed past, head down, nearly running from the courtroom. A reporter from the local paper caught my eye, pencil poised over her notepad. I'd seen her at countless women's club events. She knew exactly who I was and what this meant. Ready? Harold asked softly. I nodded, straightening my spine. We walked through the heavy doors and into the marble hallway, our footsteps echoing against the stone. People parted as we passed, some offering small nods or sympathetic smiles. The whispers followed us. Can you believe her own son? All those times he said she was confused. Thank goodness someone stood up. The main doors opened to bright sunshine and the courthouse steps. Reporters clustered near the bottom, but I barely noticed them. My attention was caught by the concrete planters flanking the steps. They were full of roses, pink and white blooms, nodding in the morning breeze. They could have been transplanted straight from my garden, the ones I'd tended for 23 years while raising a son I thought I knew. I paused beside one planter, breathing in the familiar scent. The roses didn't care about betrayal or courthouse drama. They just bloomed, steady and true, asking only for consistent care and respect in return, like me. The sunlight felt warm on my face as I straightened my shoulders, my documentation safely tucked in Harold's briefcase, my future secure in my own hands. I touched one perfect bloom gently, the same way I'd touch the ones at home later that day. Respect is earned, I whispered to the roses, to myself, to the watching world, not stolen.